This is Jacada's webinar, How to Combat High Call Volume During Times of High Anxiety. Welcome, everyone. I am Kevin Shonzik from Jacada. I will be your moderator for today. Today, which marks the first time I've worn something other than sweats in the last 3 weeks. I've been in development for Jacada for over 3 years as of January, so you've probably received an email from me. This is definitely a very situation and can ensure that we're all alone in this together. We're appreciative of the time that you've taken to learn with us today with our panel of experts. Definitely speaks to your commitment to remaining agile during times of crisis and to the long-term success of your customer operations. Once again, this is how to combat high call volume during times of high anxiety. And as a note, to honor the privacy of our attendees, only your name will appear in the attendee window. You're also all going to be on mute. So you don't have to worry about your kid, spouse, or dog interrupting the session today. Without further ado, our presenters. Renee Fredette, Senior Vice President, Contact Center Services and Solutions at PSEU. As SVP of Contact Center Operations, Renee provides overall leadership vision and strategic direction for PSEU's contact center operations. Her service centers, or her center services more than 10 million calls from credit unions per year, acting as a valuable extension of every credit union and providing a truly seamless member experience. She's an amazing partner, and it's been truly a pleasure working with her over the last 3 years. Martin Hill Wilson, a founder and customer service and AI engagement strategist at Brain Food Consulting. Martin is a customer service CX and AI engagement strategist and facilitator. He provides keynotes, masterclasses, and transformation frameworks on omnichannel contact strategy, customer-based quality management, emotion management for customer engagement, and AI-driven customer service. Martin is another valued partner of ours and has been featured on previous webinars, which still remain very relevant. So don't forget to stay in touch with him beyond today's session. And lastly, from our team, Kumran Shanmahan, Chief Growth Officer here at Jacada. Kumran heads up solution marketing and solution consulting at Jacada to help influence product innovation and go-to-market strategies for Jacada's pioneering platform. Just to set the agenda for today as well, we will discuss how to manage call center operations with agility and empathy in the wake of unexpected events such as this current coronavirus outbreak. Following the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A window at any time during the event. Some of you are already familiar with it. You told me that you couldn't hear me, so that's where you would type your questions. And then, once again, just to honor the privacy of our attendees, only your name will appear in the window. So without further ado, Kumran's going to start the conversation. So Kumran, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Did the mute button work? Were you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Couldn't take that for granted not too long ago. So glad it's all working now. Really appreciate everyone's patience as we work through that. Kevin, do you mind making me a presenter? I'd like to share some content here as we go.
Yep, there you go. Let me know if you have any issues.
Appreciate that. All right. So as we talk about dealing with high contact volumes in the call center, when customers are calling in anxious, when the customer service workforce is also dealing with new things that we've not been used to, it definitely is a moment that calls for leadership. And it's a moment that calls for leadership, not just inside call centers or customer operations or within businesses, even with our families and our personal lives, right? So there are some interesting parallels, not to get too philosophical, but there are some interesting parallels as we think about how we engage our customers, how we engage our employees during these challenging times. So just to kick off the discussion, I wanted to share with you some of my observations of what we've come to expect in these interactions. Obviously, there is this need for empathy, and the good news about this COVID season or this phase that we're going through is that we're all experiencing it in some ways, so hopefully empathy should come naturally. And then the next important aspect of engagement here is clarity. There's a lot going on, lots of confusion, so if leaders can be a voice of reason and provide clarity, there's nothing like that. And thirdly, it's about guidance, right? You can be very clear in your communication, you can be very empathetic, but if it's not really very directed, and if you're not holding my hand along the way, I could get lost. So that detailed level of guidance and making it a no-brainer is really important to really have an impact with whatever change or whatever behavior we're trying to drive. And last but not the least, given how quickly things are changing, I've heard the expression used quite a lot lately that a week is a year, right? So we need to do things very, very swiftly. We need to kind of think about these types of considerations, but we need to be pretty swift in how we act and how we respond. So these are some of the topical things that come to mind for me. And before we go into the Q&A, it's not like running a customer operation was a walk in the park before the coronavirus and the whole outbreak. As it is, things were challenging for customer operations leaders. There have been, complexities in every flavor that you can think about. Numerous channels that are not interconnected, but customers who expect those experiences to be seamless. Employees that you have to onboard and train on an ongoing basis. Processes that are pretty complex and requiring a lot of manual work. And also knowledge and content that needs to be made accessible to your workforce, to your customers, but it may not always be done, the way in which you'd ideally like things to work, right? So how do you, manage to those expectations that we just saw? Clarity, empathy, guidance, and agility, while you're already dealing with some pretty complex stuff inside your four walls. So as we go into the Q&A discussion today, we will touch on these types of topics that you can see here. We probably have like a couple of questions in each of these topics, and somewhere along the way, we will do I'll do a quick demo of how automation solutions can bring in that agility that you expect and provide that guidance in a way in which it's very clear for customers and for employees. So hopefully this will be a very interactive discussion with all the audio video aspects of this cooperating with us. And as we go, please feel free to drop in your questions in the window. Kevin's going to keep track of that, and we'll definitely have dedicated time to go into an open Q&A as we get through these topics. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to get the ball rolling here. The first question is under the topic of managing customer anxiety. It's a two-part question. I'd like to pose the first one to Martin. How to help customers who are anxious. Martin, as you may have heard from Kevin, Martin's done a lot of work in the emotive customer experience space. So I thought he could offer a lot of perspective, and then we'll go on to ask Rini the same question, relating back to how do you really operationalize that when you also have high call volumes coming into your doorstep. So Martin, let's go into this, but also it'll be great if you can share a few words about just how you see the whole landscape at this point before you take on this individual question.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll share a personal perspective. From the top of the week where, you know, we in the UK have been locked down, I think I've had 2 days being virtual headmaster, and today's been the day where I've attempted to do work. And that's been a challenge. So just before I came online, I was doing a quick spot of cricket. I was having to put the tortoise outside, come back in, and multitask with all that kind of stuff. And you know, it's difficult for all of us at the moment to be, you know, back at home, probably also taking on the kids, mindful of the fact that our employers have got tight budgets and they're having to make difficult decisions. We're probably wanting to look like we're productive employees, and yet there's a lot of conflicting pressures on us, you know, at the end of the day. And from the point of view of looking at it, you know, in terms of the psychology, our brains really don't like uncertainty. And this is undoubtedly uncertain times. You know, I think if there's one recurrent theme I hear as I scan across all the different global news channels, it's the fact that we have not been here before. You know, the stimulus package in the States, the biggest ever. You know, the number of deaths in Italy, for example, the largest ever. And whenever we're in a situation where people are very, very unfamiliar, you know, the brain quite rightly approaches that as a threat to our either physical or certainly emotional survival, and therefore tends to lock us down. And when we lock down, you know, we really have only got 3 modes of being. We've got the fight mode, we've got the get out of here mode, or we've got the freeze and don't do anything. And the difficulty with that is that we lose a lot of our flexibility and our adaptability. And we're not particularly open. And I think one of the things that we have got to appreciate is that, you know, as communicators to our customers, we've got to accept the fact that our customers aren't necessarily hearing 100% of what we're saying. They're in a very anxious state. They tend to be self-absorbed in that respect. They probably see threats where there aren't any intended. They tend to be on the defensive. You know, the psychology of bias says that you're probably looking not to lose stuff, so you're feeling threatened whilst you're hearing the answer as well. And I think that translates into the fact that we have to think very clearly about our communication style. You know, we need to listen as opposed to hear, which really means putting 100% focus. And when you're thinking about asking your frontline teams to be listening, possibly 8 hours a day, that's a very, very tough ask, you know, because it's exhausting to do that. We've also got the conflicting pressures of having to get through high volumes of customers, but also spend the time, as you mentioned earlier, to empathize, to connect, to reach across to that other person's experience and, you know, really try to make a difference. And hopefully what we manage to do in these environments is to take some of those negative emotional experiences that people have got and try to take them to a better positive place. And I think that that's the human job to be done. And when it's not a live call, then I think the other thing is that when we're doing proactive and self-service, we need to enrich that language with very human touches, emojis, adjectives to emphasize, and really make sure that we're coming across in terms of meeting not just the functional, but also the emotive needs of the customers. I think that's front and center of what we've got to be doing at this point in time.
Cool. Thank you, Martin. Rini, likewise, if you could share your personal, professional perspective on the whole landscape, and then also share your thoughts on this question, that'll be great.
Sure. So I can speak to poor Martin's situation. I am also attempting to work full time and homeschool an 8-year-old, which is very interesting. So I wasn't playing cricket, though. I think mine is down in the pool right now. I'm trying to hide myself away where she can't get to me. So I think it's interesting because, you know, to your point earlier, I think we're all kind of in the same journey. We're all experiencing similar challenges. Parents who are having to work from home and balance, consumers and customers, for us, that they're called members, all having, you know, children at home, still trying to get in touch with their different organizations, whether it be their credit unions or their utilities or their mortgage lenders or whomever. You know, we're all just trying to balance the same thing. And I think from our perspective, I look at the experience of the agent, and the agent in my mind is that next phase, right? So the customer we focus on and their anxiety and how do we help calm them. But then I look at kind of our team and our agents and how do we make sure that they have the support that they need so that they can then focus on that customer or member interaction because they're the ones who are the front line to help reduce the anxiety of the actual customer. So we've had a lot of, from an operational perspective, we've had a lot of proactive conversation with our agents. We, just like others, are in a migration to work from home to help support the business as the U.S. starts to have similar shelter at home situations. We have a number of our agents who are now working from home. They feel very supported is the feedback that we're hearing, which is wonderful. We've taken to different mechanisms in how we stay connected. And, our agents, as much as they don't always realize it, they build their own support groups within the team and within their environment. And so they work with folks all the time, every day, and they're used to that day-to-day interaction. As much as they always like to say, oh, it'd be nice if I didn't have to go into work and I could work from home. Working from home is very, very different. So how do you make sure that your agents don't feel anxious because they're feeling the same thing and don't feel like they're supported? So we've been supporting them through other mechanisms using instant messenger and supporting them through group messaging. We've been communication, I think, is something too that Martin mentioned, clearly communicating with the customer, but also clearly communicating with your agents, because the more they know about what you're doing and what your plans are, it can help them with their own anxiety, which allows them to really focus on the caller. We do general training, just like probably most of you do in the call center industry, around empathy and how to connect with your customer or member. So all that is just in a heightened way. And if there is anything that we can share is, all of our staff is, because they're all going through the same thing, they can relate in a different way. It's not a customer who has a single issue that maybe that individual on the other side of the line doesn't really understand. But since we're going through this as a globe, worldwide, I think everybody can kind of sense the overall anxiety and understands the place that people are coming from. So I think that's been a significant help. And I know that our agents are sharing that they feel much more supported and able to support our members in the calls through this transition, which has been a really nice touch.
Sweet. Martin, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think picking up on the point of communication, we are anxious when we do not know. And so I think in this heightened times, even if there isn't much progress or sense that much has changed, there's still real value in keeping an accelerated amount of proactive communication to everybody. And I think the point is there is no difference in that sense between an advisor and a customer. Both are human. They're both are the same person. And we require a lot of ongoing communication. And it's questionable whether we should be watching the TV all day. That can really depress you. The point of putting out positive messages to people, making them feel they're part of the team. The other interesting thing, by the way, if homework is new to people, they lose the aspect of physically seeing other people in the same environment with them, all working together. So me, just little me versus the world can be quite frightening. So again, thinking about using instant messaging for almost a continuous stream of reinforced positivity, updating, just to keep the mind quiet and focused on the job. You can't overemphasize that.
Great points. Thank you, Martin. And I had to start one follow-up question. So both of you mentioned topics, mentioned thoughts around more frequent communication. And again, it's more important in the context of things that keep changing this quickly. But how do you do that when you're already, dealing with a spike in contact volume, or probably entering a new zone where this might be the new norm for the next several weeks to come? So
You've
from
got
an
to-
operational standpoint, any thoughts, any recommendations on how to bring this to practice while also meeting the business demands?
Well, I think you've got to dust down your old omni-channel strategy, and really think properly. I mean, even before this, humans should really only be used for when it's emotive, complex, and matters to the relationship. And hopefully we're managing to use people as much as possible for that, to connect at human to human level and make the difference, which means there's still probably a very large volume of important but relatively simple communication to get across. And that's where the self-serve and the proactive should be taking place. So again, I would hope that people are trying to make sure that their websites and any access and information points are being maintained with almost daily updates as far as that's concerned. If they happen to be in the bot and conversational AI game, that they're making sure that those are being relevant. And then the simple stuff around of SMSing and proactive messaging, just to keep people in the loop, I think matters massively. But what I would say is the language needs to be as human as possible, and rather than sounding corporate, just to let that slip a little bit and make it feel like we're all in it together and connecting out there. I think generally people have done a good job on that, but I don't think anybody's going to regret having that level of communication. But see if you can stop some of the unnecessary stuff coming in at the advisor community, take the weight off that with a better use of the self-serve and the proactive. So that should be resourced almost on a 24/7 basis to stay up to date as the topics and the issues change almost day by day. It's a knowledge management issue.
Sure thing. Okay. All right. So the next question we have here is around empowering agents to work at home. Rini, you touched on this to some extent. Just as we see talk about taking your call center to the cloud, or enabling work at home agents very rapidly. It's one thing to have the technology in place. That itself has its own challenges, but really getting people to move to this, to change to this new way of working, knowing that this is your front line, engaging your members. What are some typical concerns or considerations that you have in place, to top of your mind?
Sure. So in a rapid deployment, like what a lot of us are starting to see, I think there's a lot of different things to think about. First, you've got to get over the technology. I know some organizations have had success with bringing their employees and their staff home. I know of others who have struggled a bit. So if you can get past the technology of being able to enable your workforce to shift home, I think that's obviously your first step. The second step is security, right? So depending on the nature of the business that you're in, if you're in banking, utilities, something where you're dealing with sensitive information, you want to make sure that you have tools that are secure. You want to make sure that the connectivity is going to be secure. You want to make sure you have monitoring in place to monitor for the normal stuff you would anyway, but you just want to be even a little bit more considerate of those things. But I think even more so, and I don't know if everyone on the call is hearing the same thing, but if you do watch the news every day, which like Martin says you really shouldn't, because it's really just depressing. If you are hearing the news, a lot of what they're talking about is the concern for people's mental health. And so the mental health, not only of the customers, but I think of our team again, right? I'm going to come from the source of, the team, the agents, the folks that we're all leaning on to do this heavy work. They're going to have higher volume in many cases, depending on the type of business. We're seeing a lot of things shift in folks who aren't able to work, and they're needing to push payments of things, coming due. And, that affects not just banking, but utilities and car and, any number of things. So there's a lot of volume coming through. So you've got agents who are now working in an environment by themselves. They don't have the normal support that they've had in the past. And they're dealing with potentially high volume calls and very anxious customers or members. So I think making sure, again, that you have that support around them. For us, we've done some really interesting things to connect. Most call centers have a lot of fun activities going on throughout the month of different contests and things to just keep people engaged. And we've done that as well. So we're spinning those types of things up, but just in a virtual space. So supervisors now have their, supervisor teams via virtual, and they all work together. We also have site teams, and interesting, as a leader of the contact center, I've actually joined those site teams, and I am in chat back and forth with our agents and our team to say, hey, how's it going? And just give a little bit of positive reinforcement. I think it's important for them to know that their leadership is right there with them, that we're all in this together. I think Martin kind of mentioned that in general too. So, lead by example and engage with them, make sure that they have the tools that they need. If there's anything going on, you can get assistance for them, but they like to hear from their leadership. They like to know that you're there, and that someone's there to help. So we've really just changed how we're engaging. We do still have some staff in the office. So we've got, our supervisory and our management staff kind of split between the two. But I think making sure that we're still engaging with those folks at home, and it's fun. I see them actually engaging even with their neighbors and chatting with their neighbors. So I think the mental health piece of one, keeping engagement, making sure people don't feel alone, because they all feel nervous and anxious still too. And now they're doing it on their own, in their homes. I think another challenge is these are folks sometimes who may not have had the environment that they would normally have to work from home. Maybe they have kids at home, like Martin and myself, and maybe some of the others on this call, with having to go play cricket or figure out how to do math homework, right? So obviously agents are a little different there because they're taking calls. They can't take breaks in between things. So, making sure that they have the ability to close themselves off from other distractions. You could hear dogs barking in the background that you might not have heard on calls in the past, depending on who you're calling and where your agents are seated. So I think the environment in which they're at, technology where they're at, not even just your technology, but do they have high-speed internet, and do they have cables that reach equipment and things of that nature? So I think one thing to share for folks who haven't already started to move home, or the work from home agents, or who are in the process, is just the change in getting equipment. There was a big run on even the USB headsets. I don't know if you guys experienced that or you heard about that as well, Martin, but getting USB headsets was quite challenging for a period of time. They seem to be coming through very well now. Even ordering laptops, a lot of these things are built in some of the countries in which have been on lockdown. So laptops and equipment, for example, that you might have been able to get in 2 days from your previous provider, from your providers, could now take a couple of weeks. So being able to dodge and weave around equipment limitations and be agile has been a really big success, at least I know for us and many of those I've spoken with who've been able to make the shift relatively quickly.
There are certainly surge pricing on some of those items, that's for sure.
Yes, there are some very expensive USB headsets now.
Yeah, and I for sure have been on at least a couple of customer service calls where the representative on the other side seemed to just have pen and paper. They didn't have much access to any systems on the back end. I believe this was more of a temp workforce, so they didn't have access to data, but there was a certain process they were trying to follow. Unfortunately, they didn't know more than I did about the situation. But it's an effort that operations leaders are undertaking to provide some level of availability and support for customers.
I think there's a comment which I'll make from a UK perspective, which may be mirrored in certain parts of the US as the pandemic spreads out and people start reacting. From a UK perspective, almost, this has been recorded on a Wednesday, on the Monday of this week, people were waking up to the fact we should be at home, but by Tuesday we'd be told we had to be home, and then it's moved extremely quickly since then. And I think what's happened is that people have fished out their home working plan in the back pocket, which they've never really executed at scale, and done it. And of course, because they've had to do it in quite extraordinary ways, literally in 24, 48, 72 hours, they've had to cut some corners. And so I think one of the interesting issues to pick up is that this is not, I mean, some of the questions we have here almost assume a steady state environment, where we are literally thinking more strategically about how you virtualize things you might have done in bricks and mortar. But there's almost a prior state, which is coming from confusion to that steady state. And it may well be that the simplest of things just don't work. I find myself at home and I just don't have good connectivity. It might be as simple as that. And I think one of the very simple things, which again, Rini was picking up on, is just to make sure that you are visibly available to everybody. And it might be that you just have a daily scrub up, almost saying, anybody had any problems, what are we going to do today? Because we're mindful of the fact that it's not perfect yet. And we need to get to a point where it's okay. And to assume that it is going to be okay from the word get-go is probably a massively incorrect one that isn't going to be appreciated. And certainly in the UK, one interesting little narrative at the moment is who's been a bad person in terms of not following the country line of staying shut. And there are certain people in terms of retail brands that have stated they're going to stay open. And if you just look at the Twitter feeds right now, they have got the black mark against them, and people will not forget that when times get good again. And so I think we're very sensitive to the way that leaderships are seen to act in the common good as opposed to, as selfish reasons. So again, back to the theme of making sure you're very careful with over communicating and being sensitive to those needs.
Great points. So at this point, what I'd like to do is jump into a demo, in which we've tried to illustrate how to embody these types of qualities when you engage your customers and when you engage your employees during times of high stress. Just to put this in some context, we've taken a scenario that the travel insurance industry was dealing with not too long ago. And just as Rini brought up this example from about USB headsets, right? What we are seeing is it's almost like a domino effect where some industries experience the change in customer interaction patterns at a certain point in time. And then as customers go through their life and as they experience different aspects of this COVID phase, if you will, different industries get impacted in different ways. Some industries are seeing a spike. Some are seeing lack of activity because nobody's on the road. And then there are, for some, it is a spike that comes and goes. For some, it's kind of like a new normal for the next several weeks. Regardless, the undercurrent here is that change, the rapid change that's going on and the need to be agile. So in this demo, what you're going to see is a customer who had made travel plans and had also purchased travel insurance. They're about to make this trip, but they're thinking about canceling it, looking at what's going on. And at this time, what happens is, a lot of customers are on the same boat. Everybody calls in, and there's a spike in call volume. So what did organizations do to deal with this when it happened and when it caught all of us off guard? The common practice was to put together a web page which explained, hey, we're experiencing high call volumes. Please bear with us. We appreciate your business and your loyalty, and here's what's going on. But that, by the way, no matter how much you try, turns out to become a pretty long document. Which, as we talked about previously, when people are anxious, they don't want to spend the time to read too much information and make incorrect conclusions. So what do? They look at the page, they still call. So when they call, again, that's what a lot of people do. Going back to what Martin said, it's sometimes these questions may not be very urgent compared to somebody who might be already traveling and somebody who might already need that medical assistance, right? Or somebody who might be in a place where maybe the borders are locked down or they can't get out and they need assistance, right? But for the ACD, a call is a call, so you end up waiting at that point, looking for the next agent. And when agents and specialists are heavily occupied, what happens is you get to a temp, and then how much does that temp know about this business, and are they really effective in helping? What then happens, right? That unfortunately has become an episode which is not really worth repeating. And I think customer operations leaders in other industries can also look to some of these industries like travel, hospitality, travel insurance, online retail, specifically the part of online retail that deals with essentials. And there are lessons that the other industries can learn, particularly those like utilities and even financial services, to see how am I going to deal with that spike or that new norm in a way in which customers can still experience the brand promise, that moment of truth that you would want to deliver on. So without further ado, let's get into this quick demo. So you should be able to see a screen with Shep Hyken's quote. Shep wrote a very good post on Forbes not too long ago, just underscoring the importance of delivering on customer experience during these tough times and how that will pay dividends as we go into the future. So right from the get-go, you're going to see a customer basically making a phone call, and we'll walk you through the guided experience from that point on. Right. All right, you should see that here in a moment. So let's say you pick up the phone and you make a phone call. There is an opportunity to tell the customer, hey, there's a 30-minute wait time. You could schedule a call back. Again, not many organizations already have the capability to schedule a call back. And we're talking about being able to do things very rapidly. So rather than taking the time to implement a callback, here is also an alternative approach where you could say there's a 30-minute wait time, but if you're calling about anything that has to do with the coronavirus, here's the fastest way to get help. And if you're interested, we're going to send you a text message, and we're going to hold your hand, and we're going to guide you through that process, right? In this scenario, the customer says, yes, that's what I need. And they get a text message with a link. And here's the important part. When I click the link, if I'm taken to the generic website, and that's a turnoff, right? Instead, there's an opportunity to provide that clarity that we talked about and provide that guidance that we talked about to make this a no-brainer, so that all I have to do as somebody who's already anxious, I can just tap my way through an experience that is really built for me for this particular scenario. It's a micro interaction. And from there on, based on what you are able to do in an agile way, perhaps if there's an ability to put a quick chatbot together to answer some free-form questions, great. But again, it takes time to also figure out what questions customers are asking these days, right? So it's great to be open and to kind of collect that input of what questions, free-form questions customers are asking. But if you can put something together that's pretty simplistic, that might help them navigate, really understand that one-pager that you have on the website, but in a much more immersive manner so that it's more effortless for them, then that is something that they can truly adopt and see the benefit of. So in this case, bear in mind, we're asking a few questions about their travel scenario, about the type of policy. We haven't even asked them to authenticate. Again, some customers may have the ability to authenticate, and maybe authentication requires new integration to backend systems, and perhaps you have or have not the time for that. So there are ways in which you can simplify it for your customers, automate what is otherwise done manually by your agents, even without having to integrate to backend systems. So really, we're at a time where we need to think about the basics, and that's exactly what you can do if we start with the end in mind, which is to make it a no-brainer for the customer and hand it to them at the point of need, so that it doesn't require any more effort for them than to just look at something and process something without burning calories. The same thing applies for your employees, the customer service workforce as well. So take my example. I went through a very comparable experience here where I had to call in and I got to an agent, and the agent was basically looking at the same document that was online, and they were trying to read out to me what options were available to me. Now, after a 30-minute wait, I thought that I was going to get a little bit more value out of that call, and this agent would know a little bit more than what I did myself. Instead, all they were able to do was schedule a call with a specialist for me. Now, even if that were the case, that call could have been shorter, would have been much more effortless for me if the agent had very detailed guidance on what that process was, and when all those options were not applicable, when it became apparent that I needed to speak to a specialist, they could have quickly gotten me to that step of scheduling that call based on availability. Bear in mind, this was not done in any fully automated manner. This is somebody taking notes, scheduling a slot, and then putting a call back in. It's not done in a sophisticated way, but that's really the type of agility we're talking about here. When you don't have a very clear sense for what to expect, there are ways in which all of us can be very nimble and agile to get to a point where we can offer a solution that's better than longer wait times or multiple contacts, which only aggravate the situation. So the way in which we bring this about is by providing a tool that somebody in the customer operations team can use, whether it's a guided experience for a customer or a guided experience for an employee in the call center. Could be a temp, could be an existing agent who's working at home, who's not very familiar with that, or who needs a little bit more hand-holding for certain scenarios. So it's really about putting together that experience in a very rapid manner. And what I'm showing you here is just a very quick example our team put together for somebody who might be wondering if they should go see a healthcare provider. I may or may not have the symptoms for coronavirus, but maybe I want to make sure if I should call in or if I should go to a testing facility, or really what my options are. And health services around the globe are dealing with the same question, because what do we hear in a public announcement? Call in and call your PCP, or contact your local healthcare provider. But everybody's got the same question, right? What is the situation? What type of symptoms are you experiencing? And this can be pretty simple, but there are so many places where you can get this information, and that consistency of that information is very important. And also, new information becomes available. I think it was yesterday or the day before, we heard that you may lose your sense of smell, and that's an early indicator. So in a situation like that, you want to be able to very quickly go into a tool, whatever you may be using, to say, all right, you know what, I need to add that one more question here, make it available to my agents, make it available to my customers, and really, do it in a very rapid manner. Right? So that's really the power of automation in a time where agility is really the essence of success, and underscores the potential to really deliver on that moment of truth. So that was the demo. At this point, I'd like to roll into the subsequent questions, which should also give us an opportunity to reflect on this demo and get your perspectives, Rini and Martin. Anything you'd like to add on this topic of managing spikes? And then we have another topic here around managing stress for IT, given how strapped for IT resources you may be in a typical day, and the challenges that it places inside the organization in the context of this heightened demand today.
Well, I noticed immediately it was described as a no-code environment, and the drag and drop way of building knowledge and decision making suggests that can be done by your frontline teams, or certainly people in an operational context. And I think that does a number of things. That speaks to the part of the agenda where we've described agility, and the fact that we are literally in a world at the moment of breaking news. So day by day we discover something new, which means you've got to be very dynamic and rapid in terms of maintaining the value of that knowledge. And the second thing is, I think that if frontline teams are doing it, they're more likely to inject the necessary empathy into the way they describe things, because they are also closer to that there. So I think that's that's an important component, that you've got to be working with a solution that delivers that and enables you to do it. And by the way, the funny thing about us as customers is we will always go for the path of least resistance. And funnily enough, if it appears to be sitting in a queue waiting for a live human, we'll do that. So we have to satisfy people's full expectations on self-serve, or they will simply go back and say, by the way, I've just read this, but can I confirm? And you've failed to meet one of the invisible things that happens on a human-to-human communication. So as much as the tech needs to be good, we also need to think quite deeply about what happens in a proper human-to-human exchange, and how can we replicate some of those things, particularly around the confidence in the answers. And that's a lot to do with the way we construct the language. For example, I've been talking recently about using pictures to reinforce text, or possibly dropping in video, because when we can see someone's face, we're typically going to trust that maybe more than something that's been written. So we need to think quite broadly again about effective ways of self-serving, as opposed to simply getting the information out. Rini, ideas from your end?
So, I mean, I love some of the ideas that they're sharing. The decision tree that you have in your capabilities of, for example, something as simple as, should I go get a test, right? And I think you could look at solutions like this visual IVR type solution, or robotic process automation, and think about how might you help get that in front of some of your customers. And if it requires a lot of integration, you might not necessarily be able to get that in place in time for this event, because it is moving at a rapid speed. But the solution is so simplistic that even if you can give the customer the feeling that things are automated on their side, or things are running fast on their side, at least the experience is good. It could be as simple as a financial institution who's got a number of their consumers or members asking to push their mortgages and their mortgage payments by a couple of months, if that's something that financial institution is going to offer. And rather than have it go through the phone line and jam up the phone lines and add to your call volume, could you add a decision tree here to say, hey, are you going to allow this to happen, yes or no? Put in your parameters. And at the end, it creates a list that you then can easily either update through scripting, which is a lot less work than integration to a full system, or have some back office folks go and enter that in. At least then it takes a lot of the heavy lifting off of the front end staff and the agents, who are probably getting a high amount of call volume, and you can shift some of that work and effort in other places. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to be agile and think about things in a different way. And I think this event in general is just going to get us all a lot more efficient, a lot faster.
I think the other thing I'd like to add is that clearly, as people come in via a queue, you've got to somehow sort them out and route them to the best possible solution. And if you haven't ever come across visual IVR before, it is a revelation relative to audio versions of it. And simply from a cognitive point of view, we just get, it's too much to remember 3 or 4 or 5 options when you're hearing it. It's much easier to contain it when you can see it. And if you're on a touch screen, which, let's face it, most of our customers are, they're then able to scroll up and down and go into quite a lot of detail in that way. And visual IVR allows you to pack, I think, a huge amount of information in a modality which is much more suitable than actually hearing it. So if you haven't done it before, it really is a big tick in the box in terms of the way customers adopt it. And given a little bit of a sneak in terms of the way you can actually build them, it's also a very usefully fast way of doing it in today's world. In fact, you can even drop an audio version of your IVR straight into that format. I think I'm right in saying. And so you can expedite that as well.
Sure thing. Yeah, speed is definitely king, and I think we're kind of expanding the frontier because, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and no better time now to get more agile with the customer operation and also how IT and customer operations collaborate going forward. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. We did get a lot of questions, from the audience. We'll address probably a couple that we can today before the time ends. We will provide a detailed response. We'll also provide a bunch of takeaways from this discussion, from the panelists. I also want to point out that, we've been writing about agility during times of crisis for the last few weeks. We'll also feature customer success stories of how Jacada clients are using automation to improve both the employee experience and the customer experience during the pandemic. So, appreciate everyone's time, but let's take at least a question or two from Kevin at this point. Kevin?
Yep, thank you, Kumaran. Can everybody hear me okay?
Indeed.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. So question one, and I'll go ahead and direct this one to you. It's focused on speed of deployment. As you demo, solutions like visual IVR, how quickly can those types of use cases be implemented? What's the turnaround? Is this something that you think would take months to implement, or is it something that you can, onboard quickly?
Yeah, it can be as quick as just within one day. It really depends on what you're going after, which is also an important thing, right? In this time, you really want to go after your high volume use cases, which you think are not really worthwhile, for your customer service workforce. If you'd rather have your agents engage customers on more meaningful interactions, it could be a simple thing like a password reset, or just informing somebody about their options, like we did in these couple of demos, pointing them to the nearest testing facility, or telling them, hey, you could schedule a call back and here's how it's done. So these types of simple use cases can be implemented even within a day from scratch. We've had many customers deploy solutions in weeks, but in today's time and age, a week is a very long time. So we should definitely think days to get solutions like these up and running. And the good thing about using automation to drive agility is that, you may already have a variety of, systems of record, CRM systems, contact center platforms, workforce engagement management systems. The beauty of an automation approach is that it will harmonize these existing systems and elevate them to a level where you can operate at a higher level of agility, which is really what's critical here, what's going to make the difference. And we can, certainly talk about this in more detail in the context of specific use cases, which is really important for things like timeline.
I'd like to build one point on that, Kumaran, which is to say you should not go for a perfect solution. You go for a minimum viable product in terms of the knowledge, and then you make it live. You listen to what customers say, you write up a new answer, you expand the scope of what it can answer, and it works in that kind of dynamic way, because the customers will then post you what they want to know. So getting something out there quickly that allows you to listen into the customers is more important than trying to build the perfect knowledge base.
There you go. And listening to customers, that's a big one. So in the examples we showed you, there's a very simplistic flow. It's almost like a decision tree. But what you also want to do is be open for dialogue. You may not be able to provide a chatbot specifically for all the coronavirus questions your customers are asking today, but you can open up a simple text box and collect feedback, and maybe within day 2 or day 3, you already have critical mass of intents that you've identified that you can now try to automate with a chatbot. So that way you're providing that yin and yang, where you're being very prescriptive on a path with guidance, and that could be majority of what we showed you. And then you can complement that with the free form, so that for scenarios that you do not already anticipate, customers have a way of expressing it. You capture that intent. Day 2, day 3, you come back to them with an automated solution that does not require them to stay on hold or have to speak to an agent if they don't need to.
And I think you can proactively push some of that stuff when they're in a visual IVR queue as well, can't you?
Right, right. The good thing about using something like a visual IVR in this scenario is that you can make more progress than just scheduling a callback. Because why? We can engage them. I can ask a couple of questions, understand their intent, maybe recommend a couple of self-serve options, and then check back in with them to see, do they still need the callback, right? So that way you can passively engage customers and get them off the phone. Same thing with chat. You know, you can think about chat as an option where it's better than the phone call, because a chat agent can chat with 5 customers at the same time. However, that's still a human, and if it's a low-value interaction, you're better off doing that in self-service. From an overall customer effort standpoint, you'd be better off looking at use cases that you can offload to self-service on any given day. But what is different about today is that we need to take a different approach when we think about automation without requiring significant integration.
And that matters a lot, because still about 30% of inbound calls come from failure to deliver via digital. So people can be on the website and it hasn't answered the question, they'll get on the line. If they've then got visual IVR, and you can knock maybe another 50% of that queue out, because you've now pushed the relevant information to them whilst they're waiting, you're winning.
Okay.
Martin?
Perfect. Thank you. We have one more question. I think in lieu of time, I think it'll be good to ask one more. Want to direct this one to Rini. Rini, this crisis happened very quickly. What long-term effects do you think that this is going to have on the future of contact center operations? With everything new coming out, what do you think might stick as we go forward?
So I think that's a really good question, and it certainly has come very rapid, and it continues to change rapidly, right? So I think there's going to be a lot more folks who are working from home in the future in the contact center industry, not necessarily mine or specific areas, but I think folks are going to end up, or organizations are going to end up a little bit more tolerant of it, because they're going to see how it goes. I also think that there's going to be a big push towards more cloud solutions. Oftentimes I'm hearing that different telecoms and some of our credit unions, some other call center organizations that I talk to, telecom has been quite a challenge. Everybody's trying to call in at the same time, and the lines get kind of full. So a lot of folks are going to start pushing very heavily towards moving their phone systems, if not already, into the cloud. I think it's going to push cloud technology at a faster pace. Also, even some of the call center solutions, the solutions that are in the cloud, like the visual IVR and things like that, you can spin up so much faster. All those tools are running much faster than the other tools that are having to go through the normal network, where the lines are already being tied up in other ways. So I think there'll be a lot more agility in the future, and even if folks bring their teams back into the office, I think they'll have a lot more planning, purposeful planning on how to do a quick shift back if need be. One of the things that we talk about is, this is a virus, and it's going to run its flu season potentially, and is it going to spin back up potentially later in this year when the flu season comes back up? We don't know. Hopefully not. Maybe we have solutions for it by then. But I have a feeling that a lot more organizations are going to be prepared for that, and we won't be caught as far in speed. We'll be able to move a lot faster.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much.
If I can add too, I do think there's going to be a bigger push towards self-service as well. I think, there's been a huge push towards self-service already. I think this is just going to push it even faster. Folks are going to find a way to open up those channels. There are just some things right now that still require a person, and that's probably going to always be the case when things get really, really tricky. And there's always going to be those customers that call that just want a voice on the phone. It's just how it happens sometimes. But I do feel like there's going to be a huge push rapidly to move as much to digital as possible.
And I think just finally, I think you've got to have investment into a generation of technology that allows you to adapt on the hoof. You know, it might be that suddenly you've got to send everyone home. It might be suddenly you've got to redistribute that to a partnership. It might be that you've got to change the mode, you know, the combination of live versus self versus proactive. Whatever those things are, you've got to have something that allows you to react extremely rapidly at the end of the day. So that's the other key thing. You know, the journey we've made from legacy on-prem type technology to the cloud isn't just a different way of buying it, it's a fundamentally different level of capability.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martin. Really appreciate that. So that concludes our webinar for today. How to combat high call volume during times of high anxiety. We really appreciate everyone's participation. If there are any questions that we were unable to answer during the session today, we will respond directly to you after the event. A replay of the event will be emailed to you soon and will also be on jacada.com. Finally, stay safe and healthy. We'd love to hear from you and get your feedback. We'll also continue to provide relevant content focused on agility during this time of crisis. So don't hesitate to come back and check for more complimentary resources. And last, if you'd like to learn more and connect with our team, you can email me directly. Kumran, I think, yep, it's on that last slide. It's not pronounced anything like it's spelled. So just might want to mention that. Yeah. But thank you all again. We really appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists as well for offering their time. It's been very insightful, and we'll get through this.